All right, so we are kicking off the sessions in the What's Working Now room this morning with Jason Bickle, who is a longtime friend of the Torrance Learning team. And he will be talking about creating the need to know. So, a little more of an introduction to Jason. Jason is the director of Learning DevCamp 2020 and the training manager for Explorlogics Inc. He has over 20 years of experience in classroom instruction, e-learning and m-learning instructional design, multimedia and graphic design, and LMS implementation. Jason has been an adjunct professor of speech communication and computer graphics and multimedia. He's currently pursuing a PhD in applied technology and performance improvement from the University of North Texas. He holds a BS in education and an MA in communication studies. So welcome, Jason. We're super excited to have you here with us today, and feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Well, nice to have everybody here. I can see all of your names. Can't see your faces, but if you were able to see me, I'd be blushing. I'd rather not show. I've actually taught a team in Switzerland at 6 a.m. my time, and then I was teaching a team in Amsterdam at 7 a.m. my time. So this is actually my fourth hour of teaching online today, which is the time of day is what's uncommon. I've had many cups of coffee, which means I'm probably a little more gregarious at this time of day than normal. So that could be a benefit or not. I don't know at this point. So today we're going to talk about the ways to create the need to know and what does that mean. And I added a little tagline in the environment that we're in right now with all the COVID stuff, more distance, more learner responsibility. And, this tends to combat some of the things that we deal with when we're dealing with online instruction in different ways. And how do we get the user more engaged in what we're doing? So where we're going to begin with that is I'd like everybody actually to get your devices or get your browser ready. If you have another monitor or something like that, go ahead and get that up and running, if you would. Okay? Because we're actually going to have a competition here. And normally I do give away a prize of something. Um, this year it's a little different because normally I have it sitting there with me and I have something. Um, if you happen to win one of the two competitions during our session today, I may get your information if you allow me to and maybe send you a little something for that. What that may be, I'm not quite sure as of yet. But there we go. So if you got your devices ready and things, now what I'd like you to do, everybody find your chat window that you can chat with me. That may be is everybody, yeah. So at the bottom of the screen, and all these different tools that we use for online instruction, I don't use Connect as often, but it's becoming more prevalent, but I use a lot of other things too. So in your chat, so what we're going to do is in these competitions that we're about to do, the first person to come back with the correct chat answer will be the winner, so to speak. Okay? All right, so get ready for this challenge. Okay? How long ago did the moon form? So let's see who comes back in the chat with that. Okay. So Rhonda is actually the first one to come back with the correct answer, or roughly the correct answer. 4.5 billion years. We have a couple of saying not a clue, really, really long time ago, and other folks probably saying I don't care. Okay, so that's one. So Rhonda, good job. Okay, and then let's do another one. So everybody get ready now that you kind of know what's coming. How many passengers and crew were on the Titanic when it sailed on its maiden voyage? So we have several different answers coming back, and it depends on the sources. The 2,400 number is is more correct. It really does just depend. Uh, and so let's see who's sort of closest above and below. So Tara and Maddie, you both came back with a quick answer there. So maybe we'll see. Those are right kind of on top of each other, but you're basically above and below it, right at about the same number, so almost equal. Okay. So it just kind of depends on your source on that one. Why don't we know exactly? Because all those third class passengers, there's estimations. That's why. So now, how does this relate to this conversation about creating the need to know? Well, the interesting thing about this is how many of you, and I'd like to hear you respond in the chat if you can, and even if you, I don't know, everybody's not unmuted, so you guys can chat on this, I guess. But the idea is those of you that participated in the competition, how focused were you? Pretty focused, right? Typing very quickly. You feel a little anxiety as you go along, right? Those of you that didn't really participate, right? Maybe felt a little anxiety because you felt like you were skipping out, or that you weren't doing what you were supposed to, or you decided almost immediately you didn't care, right? Um, so that's a mix of things. And then those of you that couldn't type fast enough, or the answers came back, as you were still typing and searching, anybody get frustrated the fact that they just couldn't do it fast enough? Right? Or couldn't win, Janet says, or I couldn't win, so oh well, right? Well, this is what, our learners feel all the time, right? Um, how do we engage them? How do we connect with them? How do we get them motivated to do things? One of the most common things I hear is I do instructional design and I work with people building online content is how do we build engagement? How do we connect people to the content so they find it valuable, find it useful? How do we get them to engage that? And what we've always believed for a long time is that if I could have a better animation, a better interaction, some better exercise, some type of game, right? If I build the perfect engagement factor, then the user would be more engaged and retention would go up and they would be better. And because they're doing better, my course is better. And because my course is better, I feel better about life and everything. But unfortunately, what happens a lot of times with online learning or any instructional design is that if the student or learner is not engaged, we feel guilty that we did something wrong. Well, I actually believe that we need to put more responsibility on the learner to learn. That we need to change the way we think about instructional design at times to put more responsibility onto the learner in that aspect. So the interesting thing about this whole creating the need to know piece is I'll tell you where it came from. Is long ago, my wife and I were watching a movie, and she got stuck. She was looking at the actor on the screen, and she was like, I've got to know who that is. And so she stopped everything. She paused the movie, which drives me crazy. She pauses the movie. She pulls up her phone or her laptop at that time. I don't remember what existed first at that point. She types in the actor. She spends 5 minutes looking who this person was, reading about them. Oh, it's this person. I saw them in this. And the thing I began to realize is that in that moment in time, my wife had the need to know. And I thought, wow, what if I could get my learners, my college students, my corporate learners, anybody that I'm training and teaching, if I could get them to have that level of need to know something, that would make my job as a teacher that much better. And not only that, but make retention go up dramatically because they need to know that information. And so that's where this idea came from. And I began to think about how do we create the need to know? Okay? Now, let's go back to another, it's not a timed exercise this time, but just a couple of other exercises here. So everybody look at the screen. You may recognize the type of artwork, but how many hidden objects can you find in this image? Go ahead and type them in the chat when you find them, if you would. Okay. Normally, when I teach this in class and I can see everybody's faces, people are raising their hands and calling out things. We see a cookie. Any others? Bow tie is a butterfly, yeah. So you're looking right here. The butterfly. Loaf of bread in the leg, yep, right there. Sailboat in the arm, which is right there. Okay. Any others you see? All right. Now there's quite a few. There's upside down in Washington's tie. Yep. So the interesting thing about this, okay, is that if you could see each other in the room right now, you would all have your face really close to the screen, and you'd be looking diligently at all the little things, and you'd be hyper focused on trying to find elements within the screen. Isn't that the kind of focus that we want to have? I built some curiosity by putting an image up, and then I asked you to do something, and that curiosity drove you to be highly focused and discover things that you may have not seen before. Okay? All right. So let's do another little exercise here. So here's something that comes up, sort of a more practical thing that we see. Okay? A class of 15 people in different offices, right? So it's different people in different offices need to learn the new federal safety guidelines in 3 days. Okay? All you have is the new online guide. Okay? How do you motivate the learners to take responsibility to learn the new material? You don't have time in 3 days to build a full course. So what are some ways that you could get those 15 people to learn the new guidelines over that 3-day period? And I'm just waiting. I'll let a few answers come in, and then we'll talk about them. So some of the ideas that have come in is that, and I think everybody can read them. So, you can do a scavenger hunt. Hey, go find the new guidelines, and you could kind of pass that out to everybody. You could have people find them and teach others the guidelines. Okay, so you kind of have the teach the teacher mode, right? Based on an online quiz where the achievement relies on finding answers in the guide. So you could build a quiz. You could do case studies, right? Have them assess their office for the new guidelines, right? Have an office moderator. So, normally a lot of times what we think, okay, we're going to build this little content or course, or we're going to do this quick online training, and if I build the training, if I build the learning there, it means that I have to do all the work and I have to kind of distill everything down, right? But am I the only one in that team that is capable of breaking that information down and teaching? No, and many of you have already said that I'm not the only one that has to do that. But oftentimes, as training managers, training developers, instructional designers, we assume that we have to be that gatekeeper for all that new knowledge or change knowledge, etc. But again, we can put more responsibility on the user from that standpoint. Okay. And just a quote here for you. It says, learners may not be inspired by the answers, but the questions we ask. I've been an instructional designer, teacher, trainer, professor for a long time. And in that process, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the best way to teach something. So I'll break it down and I'll distill it and I'll work with it and I'll keep going from that standpoint. And the interesting thing about that is, and then when the learners don't learn something, I feel guilty because I didn't do my job. And so what's interesting is I think we have to think a little differently about how we approach some of our instructional design. I'm not saying that you have to recreate all of your structures. I'm saying we use create the need to know as a way to add into your structures to add more engagement and more responsibility to the user. So how do we do that? How do we make that happen? Well, if there were no audio, animation, or interactivity, if there was no instructor, right, available right there, would they still learn? Well, I would say absolutely we do, because think about how we learn things. Most of us that are instructional designers and developers and teachers and instructors, when we need to learn something, we go search for it, we find sources, and most of those sources we read information, we gather new information, and we learn that way. Most of the things that we have to learn on a daily basis are not these highly engaging things from the standpoint of audio animation or a happy instructor or whatever it may be. We learn it because it's beneficial or relevant or unique or something that we need, right? Okay. So as we begin thinking about this process of instructional design and how we tend to do it as instructional designers and developers and teachers and trainers, is looking at the way we manage perception. So here's the brain, okay? And where we are is the brain. We cannot know everything. There's a lot of information in the world, and there's a lot of information we have access to, and there's a lot of information that we access. And because we can't know everything, we have to select certain things, okay? And because we have to select certain things, that's all we know, okay? And as instructional designers, what we do is we work to control the selection process. And what a learner will tend to select is what is unique, beneficial, relevant, or repetitious, okay? And we decide what they're going to select. So we look at all the material, all the things they need to learn, all the performance things they need to accomplish, and we say, you need to learn these things to do these things. And we sort of pre-select that for them, and we say, these are the things you need to know. Okay? And then the learner will organize that information into mental file folders. From an instructional design standpoint, you'll call this a schema or a set of schemata, right? And we organize those into mental file folders. And so we help them select things, and then we tell them where to put it in their head. Organize it like this. Here are the buckets in your head you need to put them in, okay? So not only do we tell them what to select, we organize it for them in their head. We do the best we can. And then not only that, but once they've selected and organized that material, then we get into the idea of how do they interpret that. In other words, how do they make sense of that content from there? And the idea becomes is not only do we want to control what they select and how they organize it, because it's you need to select these things, you need to organize them these ways in your head, and you need to interpret it in the ways that we have, but we also work to control how we recall that information. So in other words, how are you going to use the information that you've selected, organized, interpreted, and in your head? And so we say, here's what you need to learn, here's how you need to organize it in your head, here's how to make sense of it, and then this is how you need to perform. Okay? So we as instructional designers, and I know it sounds, I'm getting a little bit down on us, but we try to control every aspect of perception. In other words, all four phases of this, because we know better how to do it than someone else. And in cases that may be true, but intense in controlling this, how many of you as instructional designers, teachers, trainers, professors as it may be, don't always make the best student? We love teaching, we love training, we love building content, but when somebody tries to tell us how to organize things, there's a little bit of a ruffling of the feathers, so to speak. Well, our learners are kind of the same way. And so what if we stepped out of this process a bit? Yes, there are objectives that somebody must learn. There are tasks that people must learn. But what if we pulled ourselves out of this process a bit? Okay? Well, what would that mean? Okay. Now, the interesting thing about perception is the simple fact that what we select, organize, and interpret really is our reality. If all I read is the news, for example, and that's all I think about, that's all I select and organize and interpret and recall, then that becomes my reality. If all I do is watch movies, I tell my students this all the time. If all I do is watch movies, let's say romantic movies, then that's what that's what I select, organize, and interpret and recall about movies. That's maybe what love seems to me. It seems to be like a movie. Horror movies the same way. The things that I read, etc. So what I select literally becomes my reality as I go through. So as you're teaching people and working with people to learn things, you are actually helping them create their reality in that process. But what if we take a step out of that a little bit and don't just improve or control selection, but we create the need to know? So if we define needs here, okay, we have 4 needs, and these are straight out of the dictionary. So the first need is a duty or obligation. Do you think that's a very strong need? Does anybody like to be assigned something? Does anybody like to be obligated to do something? No. It's a very weak need structure. Matter of fact, we push against it. So, but a lot of times with training and education, we say you must do this. And so in our training, we need to find a way to tell them, convince them that it's beneficial to them in some way, right? Lack of something required or useful, that's better. If I figure out that what I'm being trained on or being taught is something useful to me, that's even better. But what if I can create a physiological or psychological requirement for well-being? That point where my wife was a few years ago, where she had to stop everything to look up at that actor. That was a physiological or psychological need or a condition. Number 4, a condition requiring supplier relief. What if I could create that in my users? I could ask them questions that inspire them to go out and find things and go out and discover things for themselves in different ways to create these stronger needs here. What if I could do that? Okay. So if we think about needs, and I don't have to spend a lot of time with Maslow. Everybody has studied this at some point, or you've seen it at least. But Maslow, physiological needs, which is our food or water, our safety needs, home and security, love and belonging, basically being part of a group and feeling love, esteem, the recognition of others, and then self-actualization, actually getting to your potential. But in our instructional design, what if we work to meet a higher level need? Okay. So the thing is if we look at just a duty or obligation, like if you don't do this training or you don't take this course or you don't do these things, it's going to affect your job, for example, or it's going to affect your degree. They kind of live down here with physiological needs. If you don't have a job, you can't pay for things, therefore you don't have food, right? And so those lighter level needs really do have, they meet the lower level needs on the Maslow scale here. And this is a sliding scale. And in our conditions that we're in right now, we're all kind of sliding in between these because we're getting very concerned about food, water, safety, security. And so we're sliding from doing the best, reaching our truest potential. And we're kind of all functioning down here right now because we're concerned about a lot of things. But in our training, if we can convince people to say, hey, look, you go out and discover and teach and find things and learn things for yourself. Now we're building a higher level need based on esteem and self-actualization and even love and belonging, as far as being meaningful relationships can be tied in there as well. So these 2 need structures, as far as 2 through 3, okay, can all be kind of associated as you move up the Maslow's need structure. So anytime in the group, for especially esteem, anytime in the group you can give somebody responsibility, anytime you can give them action to do something for someone else, that can improve their esteem and connections to other people within the group. And so that may be something you add to your instructional design, having them do something where you're not absolutely controlling the entire perception process. Right? Now, let's talk about power structures here. Okay. So, and we'll get back to, about needs and power, and I'm going to put those two together in just a second. But we have power needs as well. Okay. Now, power is causing something or making something happen for someone else. In other words, right? So I can change their mind. I can change their actions. I can change the way they feel. Those kinds of things. So that's power. So the first type of power, or the lowest level type of power, is coercive power, or punishment power, if you will. Those of you that are parents or even pets, a lot of times people will kind of go to the coercive power, and if you do this, you're going to get this, right? You're going to get in trouble, however that may be, that punishment power. But that's really not a high-level motivator, right? That from that standpoint, we resent coercive power a lot of times. And then we have reward power. Okay, reward power we use often as well. Hey, if you go do this, you'll get this reward, and that's a higher level power. It does, but it's short-lived in the sense if I give a bonus or if I give some kind of reward when you do something, I get a short bump on esteem, and that feels good, and that's a higher level power. It's better to give a reward a lot of times than punishment if you can, but it's still a short-lived reward process in that. Okay, but then we have knowledge power, and in all the little commercials as we were kids, the little public announcements, there's knowledge is power, and it really is. The more knowledge we have around a topic, the more knowledge we have about our organization, the more knowledge we have about how we do things, the more powerful I am because I can see the connections between those things, and I can infer and make judgments on what could happen and make and all those kinds of things. And so knowledge really is power. So instead of just giving it a reward because somebody achieved something, convince them that this knowledge is important to them. Why is it important? Not just because somebody said so. That's a lower level need. Why does this knowledge help them? Make that argument in your instructional design. Don't just go through this because I say so and you'll get in trouble, coercive. Don't just do this because we're going to give you an evaluation and this will be a reward and you might get a parking spot or a cash bonus. But a higher level power is saying, hey, look, if you do this, this is how it's going to improve your knowledge, and what does that do for you within your organization or your class or whatever it may be. Okay. Now the next piece, I lost my mouse here. There we go. The next piece is legitimate power. So legitimate power is based on your position. So on the position that you hold, okay, then you have power to do certain things. So this may be professor's power with the students. It may be a teacher's power with their students. It may be a manager's power with their team. It may be team members' power with their customers. You have a legitimate power because of your position. And what begins to happen is the reason you will have legitimate power, the reason somebody at Taco Bell gets promoted from taco maker to shift manager is because they have knowledge, they have experience. And once you have that knowledge and experience, then you can gain legitimate power, okay? And legitimate power based on position. And what happens is if you work knowledge up and you say, hey, look, if you take this material, you'll do these things, you take this education, you do this stuff, you can gain more legitimate power or power based on position, the more likely you are to continue that course or material. Now the final piece here is reverent power. You'll see it in other sources as referent power as well, REF. And this is to revere, okay? So fundamentally, reverent power is respect. This is, you have power because people respect you, okay? You have power because people believe what you have to say is valuable, okay? And what you're doing is valuable. And the interesting thing is reverent power is respect. And what happens is we try to use coercive power, reward power to get respect. But in truth, all of these get combined to create reverent power. That knowledge and position and our ability to do things creates respect. And it's not just the punishments that we can roll out. It's not just the rewards we can give. It is that I've earned that respect and trust for the people I work with. And so if you fundamentally respect your learner and you say, hey, look, I believe you can go do this on your own. You can discover this on your own and do this the way that you would do it, and that's valuable, then they're more likely, if you show them respect, they're going to give you respect back. Now, this seems like a little thing, and I'd be lying if I didn't say I got this from Mr. Holland's Opus before I started teaching 1,000 years ago. But when I first started teaching at the high school level, I did call all my students by Mr. and Miss and their first name, Miss Betty and Mr. John and all these kinds of things. And it amazed me because I had freshmen. My first history class of the day was a history class, and everybody told me how bad that class was. And just in the teacher's lounge, which is a conglomeration of all types of comments and all kinds of stuff, where people can talk good things and bad things about what's going on. And I heard all kinds of things about this class. And it was amazing because just by giving them a little respect, giving them a little responsibility, hey, you can take care of that. Hey, go look this up. Hey, you can do these things. And I didn't have to spoon feed them everything. And I didn't treat them like they couldn't accomplish things. That class changed. And it was all because of respect. And so how do we do that in our instructional design? That means that we trust that our learners can learn for themselves, that we can give them tasks and they can go figure out how to accomplish that task. We can give them instructions and questions and they can go figure those things out. Now, I'm not saying this replaces all of our content. I'm just saying in our structures of things that they have to learn, there are points that we can create a need to know, and we can use higher level needs, that help them with esteem within the group and get, and they can work with others as power users or, team leaders. Even if they're not a team leader, that esteem, tasks that you're giving them also can make them feel like belong and part of the team. And then you look at the power structures, and if you convince them that there is knowledge is beneficial to them, and you convince them that that knowledge will help with that legitimate and even respect power, and you give them respect in your instruction and the way you're building classes, the more likely they'll go through the material. Okay? So what does that mean overall? It means that, a lot of times we break things down so much in training, we spoon feed our learners, and they go through it and they don't have to really critically think about much because we're telling them everything. We're controlling every part of the perception process, selecting, organizing, interpreting, and recalling. And because we're controlling every part of it, that breaks down into some lack of respect that they're not intelligent, that they're not capable. And actually, what I've found anecdotally and with other customers that I've worked with in doing this instructional design is that the more respect, the more challenges that we give the learner, the more respect they feel, the more engaged they are, because they feel like they're involved in the learning process in that case. Okay. All right. So just real quick, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to go through some of these other things on how to do this, but does anybody have any comments or questions? I know it's a little interesting to ask this way. It'll come up in the chat, but any thoughts so far? If nothing else, it gives me a chance to take a drink of coffee. Okay, well, either everybody's asleep or I'm spoon feeding you and you've gone to sleep. I'm not trying to do that. Usually we discuss more as we go through, but we're kind of working. Usually when I do my classes and stuff, I open all the mics and I can hear everybody. And so I didn't ask to do that this time. Probably should have, but I didn't. Just an oversight on my side. But let's just kind of continue here. So really, if you utilize higher ranked needs, I'm clicking on the wrong spot. There we go. Higher ranked needs and power to create the need to know. So what is that going to do, right? I'll just throw all these up here, okay? Is that stimulation. If the learner is cognitively stimulated and is actively processing and interpreting information, they're going to be more engaged in what they're doing. So if you're asking questions instead of giving information, they're going to be more engaged. They'll be more motivated as well. Learner is driven to act to meet the need right? The physiological, psychological usefulness to fulfillment becomes priority. And then finally, allowing the users to investigate. Do you have to make sure that they know everything that you thought they should know, or could they know more? Could they shape it differently? Could they organize it differently? Could it be thought of differently? Sure, it could, because we all perceive things differently. Okay? So the need to know requires letting go of the need to control all learning environments or content, right? Let the learner ask the learner questions, let them go and do things, as we discussed with the legal guidelines. Realize that motivated learners can learn without assistance. And they can. You do that all the time as trainers and teachers and online creators, etc. And then use technology to foster, inspire an environment of discovery. That is the one great thing, is that we actually now have access to more information than we've ever had in human history. Literally from our house, a lot of us, just from the bedroom, we have access to all of these things from wherever our computer happens to be, right? So use technology to foster that. Okay? Now, there are different ways to create the need to know. Usually I would break everybody, we don't have time today, but I would break everybody into groups and we'd kind of talk about, brainstorm some of these ways. And I'm going to give you examples of some of these as we go. But we have discovery and curiosity, competitions and gaming. And I don't mean just games to have fun. I mean gaming to create that level of competition to motivate people. Learner creation, where people create things. Learner becomes a teacher. You ask the learner to teach someone else. And then individual and team challengers. Okay? So for discovery and curiosity, okay, here are some things that you can do in your instructional design. And when I think about instructional design, everybody, by the way, I'm not thinking about just a course or a program. I think about your entire environment. I call it macro instructional design. I look at the environment of the entire organization. I look at the environment of the teams. I look at the technological environment. I look at the way they communicate, email, Teams, how we, webinars, how we do all of those things. And I look at that macro instructional design. How can I use all of that to my benefit in this? So defining discovery and curiosity, a well-designed resource center. So, all the things that you would use to build a class, all the resources you would use to gather information and retrieve and make a class and do the instructional design, put all that material up in a resource center. It doesn't matter if it's raw. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. Get it all up there. Those are the same things that you would use to build a class. You could also send out a question of the day, right? And people could go to that resource center and find things. The good thing about our question of the day is it's discovery and curiosity, and they're going to try to come back who comes back the fastest and all that kind of stuff. But it's a short period of time. They don't have to sit for a 15-minute course or a 30-minute course or an hour course. It's just a quick hit on some knowledge that they may need. What's wrong with this picture? I'm always amazed that if you send out an email that has wrong information, if you send out an email that's all correct, you'll literally get no responses or very few. But if you send out an email that's full of errors, you're going to get a ton of responses back. As long as you let them know at some point that you sent it out with errors on purpose, because it helps people see what they need to know. And actually, I looked in the guide and it was this and this, et cetera, right? So you can send out a what's wrong with this picture or what's wrong with this list, and they would go find things. People love pointing out what's wrong with something. A little bit of human nature there. Top 5 list, find the problem in the process. Open book or quiz or evaluations. I love giving open book evaluations because it makes them dig. And the exams or the quizzes can be more difficult because of that, but they end up learning more. Okay. Now let's move on to competitions in gaming. And you don't have to do all, by the way, you don't have to do all these at once. I sort of have a concept called learning seasons. So you could implement these at different parts of the year to sort of promote different training activities. So all of this doesn't have to happen at once. The only thing I'd recommend having all the time is the resource center. But these other things can go in seasons and timings of things to promote your training. Leaderboards, top of the month, timelines and deadlines, and show where people are. A timeline might be, well, you're red, you're not close to completing things. You're yellow, you're green. And you'd be amazed just with colors how that would motivate people just to kind of move through things. You're trusting them to do it, but you're just telling them where they need to be, and give it to everybody. That's part of that esteem amongst the group that will help create that need to know. Um, Learner creation. Build a project illustrating new process, share the benefits, write an article, film a video. Everybody has a camera in their pocket or on their screen. So it's easier now than it's ever been to have the learner create content, a blog, a wiki article. Yes, those things can be reviewed and paid attention to, but you can do all those things to get that learner involved and get them engaged as well. Okay. Learner become teacher. Have people host webinars for other people on the team. Teach this and add your perspective. Be a mentor. All these kinds of things that you can add to add that. In the end, if you think about learner becomes teacher and they create things, etc., the whole thing is you're giving them respect because they can do the things on their own. Individual team challenges, solve the problem webinar, solve the game. You could give teams challenges to solve certain problems. The way that you solve a problem in a course may be a little different than the way they figure it out. And that's okay, as long as the problem gets solved, right? And not only that, but if they do something a little different than what you would teach in a class, that's a perfect teachable moment where you can say, you guys did it this way, and that was great, but think about this too, right? And that's a perfect place where you may be able to insert some knowledge in that as well. Okay. All right, so really, fundamentally, creating the need to know is all about putting more respect for the learner in the process. And I'm just going to kind of go back to this other slide here. Is giving the learner more respect, stimulating them more, giving them something to do, making them more responsible. I love giving projects, for example, and it will motivate them to build more investigation, and they'll do that more as they go through. You don't have to do it necessarily with every piece of content, with every course you teach, but you'll find ways to create you can find ways in everything that you teach, everything that you build, everything that you do to add that need to know. And you'll find that adding respect, adding that higher level need, letting other people in the group see what's going on, that they'll be more motivated than they may be in other cases. Okay. All right, now I added something just to the end of the presentation here because it dealt specifically with online engagement, and I wanted to just mention that. Let me get back to that slide here. Last year, I had the privilege of working with two other researchers, and we wrote a paper on social presence. Social presence is the perception of others as being real people in technology media environments. In other words, as I talk to you, do you believe I'm real? And as you talk to me in an online environment or over the telephone or whatever it may be, do I believe you're real? And the way, fundamentally, what this means is the more responsive you are, the more they know about you, the more you answer questions, the more you talk to people, the higher level social presence is. And you want higher level social presence because it increases retention. So the more that we tell about each other, the more they know that we're a real person, the more engagement happens, and the higher the retention rate. So in this paper, I put a link. It's in the presentation that you guys have access to. The full paper is here, but I just wanted to talk about some of the big things that if you're doing synchronous learning, some of the things that you can do to engage that learner from a social presence standpoint. Okay, fundamentally, more experienced instructors tend to do better with higher social presence. Okay, and use face-to-face instruction, which we're doing a lot of right now. Taking instructional breaks, utilize audio and stuff, and we do all those things kind of dynamically. But it needs to be the more live and the more feedback you can get, the better. And then there's actually examples for the learner side as far as the asynchronous side, which references a lot of the things I talked about in the Need to Know with the Discovery Center and finding out how to do things and how to respond to people as we go along. And so in that Need to Know, I thought social presence was important because if they believe you're real online and you're asking questions and things and you're responding to them, they will have a higher need to know because they are responding to a real person. If you just post an article and say, give me your responses in text, they're going to be less motivated. If it's coming from a real person and they believe that, then they'll be more motivated and that need to know will be higher. Um, that article is wrapped around in the instructional design around Gagne's 9 events of instruction, which is actually my favorite instructional design model. And so it's presented in that structure, so you'll see that in the article, and there is support for that as well. All right, well, that being said, my time is up. The last thing I'll just be willing to say is that Learning DevCamp and ID Academy, DevCamp 2020 is now all online in September 14th to the 17th, and I would love to have all of you there for that. And you go to learningdevcamp.com to learn for more information. I really appreciate all of your time today. I hope it was helpful for you, and if you have questions, just contact the Torrance Learning Group. They'll give you my contact information, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you, Jason, for sharing today how we can create the need to know. And, Jason mentioned Learning DevCamp 2020, which is an event that, Torrance Learning has been a part of and can recommend it to you all. So definitely check that out. In our last few minutes here, we'd love to do